New Year's of 2012, I was in Sydney, actually.
Nice.
That's when I ended up on this sex cult.
Okay, so I can't let that slide. Let's talk about it.
It's so funny. I was just telling these stories the other day because my friend and I were doing a podcast, and every story was like, there was a boy. And she's like, well, aren't we empowered? It's like, there's a boy. And I followed him up to Byron Bay, and then he was going to meet his mates for a holiday, week or so, and also hook up with a bunch of girls that he knew. And I was just kind of his co-pilot because it turns out he really just didn't want to do that drive alone from Sydney to Byron Bay, which is about, I think it probably took us like 12 or 13 hours. And it's a pretty long drive, beautiful drive though. And there was nowhere to stay because it was the holiday weekend. It was right after Christmas and it was right after New Year's, and it's just their big holiday. So and Byron Bay is it's just gorgeous beach town on the east coast of Australia, in between Sydney and kind of the Gold Coast. And it's a very hippie town too. But so I went on woofing or couch surfing, one of the two, and it said, oh, there's a yoga retreat. That was how it was described. And I'm like, oh, a yoga retreat. I can do this. I'm a yogi. No problem. I'll just stay there. Don't worry about me. I got this. Because I wanted to be just I'm an independent. You don't need to worry about me. And then these people came to get me, and he was kind of waiting because he felt really guilty because he's like, it'll be no problem. There'll be plenty of places to stay. And there's nothing. So then he brought me there and just felt horrible. And now these two people in white robes come and like collect me. And they show up and they have just kind of pinwheels in their eyes. And he's like, well, good luck to you. Bye. I was like, I hate you right now. I seriously was like, I fucking hate you. And so they picked me up, drove me deep into the bush. And at another moment where I was like driving with these people who I didn't know into a remote area of a foreign country, I'm like, might never be seen again. And then you get there and they're like, well, there's no Wi-Fi. There's no, you're not allowed to have your phones. This is an ashram. And I was like, oh, shoot. This is not a yoga retreat. This is an ashram. And that I got there in the evening. And so it was their evening lessons with none other than Osho, who, for people who don't know who that is, he was the Bhagwan in that Wild Wild Country documentary that everybody was obsessed with about the cult basically in Oregon. So he started in India and then ended up in Oregon. And there are little offshoots of his Osho ashrams all over the world. And this was an Osho ashram. And so I was very forthright with the guru guy the first night. And I was like, is this a sex cult? And he's like, well, not unless you want it to be. I'm like,
so yeah, that's a hard yes.
So yes, it is. Yeah. I was like, oh, great.
If you answer the question, is this a sex cult, with anything less than a flat no?
Yeah.
It's a fucking sex cult. It's a binary. There's no dimmer on this light switch.
I know. It's
yeah. So how long did you end up staying with them?
Like for almost 3 weeks, actually. Shockingly.
Nice.
There's a boy. So I met another boy. Yeah, he was from Melbourne and he was a musician. He was amazing, but he came a little bit later. He wasn't really into and I wasn't either. I actually didn't have, he and I became very close, but I wasn't like swapping around like a lot of the other people were. And sometimes the people there was like the regulars who live there and then people like me who are kind of just coming through.
Right.
And then people who would come for like a night and be like, I'm getting the hell out of here.
Yeah.
They were probably the smarter ones. But yeah, I mean, I'm pretty adaptable. So I kind of just threw myself into ashram life. And it was wild because the bush itself is amazing. I mean, I cannot, again, made it into the PowerPoint presentation. Just the night we would always do an evening meditation. And it was always when the sun went down in the bush. And you would be sitting on this ridge overlooking these valleys, and all the sudden there would be just this engine of the jungle that starts purring, and it would just be layer after layer after layer of frogs, insects, cicadas, like weird noises. I don't even know what they were. It was for Sri Lanka, for me, it was so visual, and the bush was so auditory. There were so many crazy sounds. Like, we had these little tin roof kind of places where we lived, and it happened to be raining a lot when I was there, and there would be just these downpours on the tin roof with the massive frogs just making their little frog noises. It was wild.
This feels a lot like the Amazon for me. It's just
Um,
multi-layered. I I'll give you an anecdote. So this show, you are opening and launching the interview portion of the show, but the show historically hasn't been. The rest of the show is these sort of immersive stories, right? So like if I'm on the beach in the story, you hear the sounds of the ocean, or and I'm right now at the time of us recording this touching up some of the Amazon episodes. In all the other episodes, the track in the background, if I'm in a bar, like the people chatting and the glasses clinking and all the things, I'll have like one or two tracks that are underlying my narration. In the Amazon, it just didn't quite feel like it sounded like the Amazon to me. And so I'd add more tracks and more and more. And at one point I was like, I have like 40 separate sounds of crickets going at the same time.
Yeah.
And it still doesn't sound as rich and as full as the actual Amazon, just because it's this convoluted chorus or orchestra happening all in the same moment. I can only imagine Australia's.
Yeah, I think it sounds very similar. It was kind of all like an all-consuming auditory experience,
Yeah.
and I mean, I lived for that sound. I just lived for it every single night. I think that's kind of what kept me longer than. And then we had to do a lot of work because it was a little bit like woofing, really hard manual labor. So using these kind of Indonesian techniques of, they would mow these big fields that were on the property, and then we had to rake all these rows, and then you put it in a tarp and like drag it, and I had to push barrels of this stuff up a hill with the little guru like up top. I felt like I was in like Kill Bill, where she's like training, where there's this little old man with gray hair and he's like, faster. Like, 'cause you are weak. You are weak and slow. It's pretty abusive. There's like but kind of funny. I don't know. The problem with being a writer is that you're kind of in situations where you're like, it's gonna be good material if I live through it.
That's the beauty of it, right? Is everything is either awesome or a great story. Like there's no in between.
Any ashram generally has a large part in ideology, and with that, a lot of indoctrination.
Yeah.
I kept calling it the RAM, the ashram, but I was like, life on the RAM was kind of weird because a lot of the rhetoric was focused on your identity, but letting go of your identity. And this is kind of true in any of these cultures because they want you to take on another name and become a sannyasin, and they cloak it in this idea of like, oh, what are you clinging to? What parts of this like egocentric culture that you left behind are you still holding on to, like your name and your identity and who you think you are and your ambitions, and they can kind of break you down, and a lot of people go batshit crazy in these environments. And there were a lot of really lost souls in these places too. Because I went to one in New Zealand that was much more strict. They had the golden silence, like 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. There's no speaking. You chant every morning at 5 a.m. And some of the people who stayed, the regulars, like shave their heads. And so they were kind of all in and changed their names. And it's an easy way to manipulate people, I think, especially if they're a little bit aimless and lost.
Which I assume is probably the demographic that shows up.
Yeah, luckily I'm less aimless and more open. And I think that's always kind of saved me. The other thing that's always saved me, because I'm kind of like a cult's target market. They all looked at me like, you belong here. And
we got one.
Yeah, we got one. We got this one. You know, I have a really messed up background. I'm very open-minded. I have a very free spirit.
Yeah.
But I think my irreverence ultimately kind of protects me from any real ideology. It's just like I can't take any of it seriously. There's no I was raised, Catholic. I'm like it's all kind of any system where it's all these like rules and rituals and whatever. I'm like, okay, well, I can, blend in and be open and experience it, but I'm never really gonna go like all the way in.
I also grew up Catholic. This phrase was very popular in my teenage years. The
Mhm.
love God, hate his fan club thing.
Yeah.
In hindsight, it was just a ploy to keep some sense of your religiosity indoctrinated. Right. So, first of all, once you get to a certain age, you realize that rings true of everything. There's a beautiful thing in the center, and then humans in their wisdom fucked the whole thing. The meditation element you just talked about. There is at the core of meditation this beautiful recognition, sort of
Presence.
the absence of self and presence.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you need to change your name, move to
Mhm.
Australia, and shave your head.
Right. Although I think it makes sense because I think in some ways we all I really the more I see just experience humans in different cultures and even seeing atheists, they become kind of religious
Yeah.
about atheism. So I just have started to wonder if there isn't just a genetic part of being human that needs that sense of religion, like turns things into a religion. It's like you're almost always looking for this structure to make sense of all
Yeah.
of the chaos, because I think being human is very very confusing. And this is the thing about being like in the jungle or living on the beach or seeing the seasons, recognizing the order. There's night and day. There's elements and examples of order all around us.
Right.
And then there's so much chaos within that. And we're so chaotic and we are so complicated. And so being a human is a very confusing thing, I think. Because you can see, like, well, there's a lot of organization going on around me. Even like a rose, you're like, how is this so perfect? How is this design so perfect? And how come I can't figure out anything about life? Or like, why do I feel so confused? And I think in that confusion is that tendency to look for anything to make sense of it, whether that's going on an ashram and changing your name and diving into that ideology, and a lot of these people who I talked to on these ashrams absolutely came out of very religious families, and they thought they were rebelling against them by just kind of joining another essentially religion. It just wasn't the same traditional religion that they were raised with.
What humans have been able to do is create stories that everybody buys into. Right.
Mhm.
And so religion is an obvious one, but so is IBM. Like, what the hell is IBM other than us all agreeing that this corporation with this logo means this thing and we all pay the
Mhm.
money for this and they provide this service? Right.
Right.
At a certain level, an ashram is providing a new story to help people justify to help people find direction, right, in that moment.
Mhm.
There's beauty in that, and I actually think it just is which stories you've chosen to incorporate deeply into your life.
Yeah. I think the really interesting thing about being on this ashram was the paring down of coming from a very obviously very Western, very convenient society. We had to wake up super early and we didn't have a stove. So we had to just take wood and build a fire. It was in a grill, but we didn't have like any kind of charcoal. We just used wood. So we built this fire in the grill, and then you had to wait for the fire to heat up and then boil water, a big pot of water because you had to use it for all kinds of things.
Yeah.
And just making coffee was such a huge effort, and making breakfast, and then chopping all the vegetables, and we ate completely vegan. There was no cheese, there was no meat. There was no real refrigeration. I think we had a very small thing. And you would cook a huge lunch and then you basically ate the leftovers for dinner. So I felt actually great after kind of detoxing because I had just been partying in Sydney. After getting through the original detox, you do start. I understood why they had this kind of clear eye, like, wee.
Yeah.
And you wake up and you do their crazy dynamic meditation where you're jumping and doing breath work. And the whole point of an ashram is to minimize distraction so that you can get in touch with the inner silence.
Yeah.
There is something that feels instinctively and intuitively natural about that way of life. You wake up with the sunrise, you work really hard in the gardens or on the land. There is something, it's like every time I pump gas, there's a part of me that's like, ugh. I just feel like, I don't know. It's like my soul dies a little or something. There's just something about it that always makes me feel like it's that inevitable encounter with the self that we avoid, and you cannot avoid it in an environment like this. The environment is designed for you to face the capital S self.
Right. Well, I haven't spent any time in an environment like that, but what I have heard, especially from folks who spend time on silent meditation retreats, is that your highs are higher and your lows are lower by an order of magnitude. Is that something that you experienced or felt?
I did see people whose brains were kind of being broken just because the guru would be breaking people down. There was the process is you kind of jump up and down and breathe, and then you at a certain point you kind of scream into a pillow, and you get to punch the pillow. You have a pillow and you have blindfold so you don't have to be distracted by anyone else, and you just let whatever out. It can be laughing, it can be crying, it can be whatever. You let it all come out. One day when I thought I'd give it a try because why not? And one day while I was doing it, um, I had this crazy breakdown where I threw a tantrum and I was like, I don't want to go to school. And this was like a tantrum that was lodged in me from 6 years old. You know, it was like this tantrum I never got to throw. I would have gotten my ass kicked if I had thrown a tantrum like that. But it was so wild. It was like this little kid that never got to express that. And then another day I was doing it.
I'm sorry, you actually said those words?
Yeah. I was like, I don't want to go to school. It came out of nowhere. It was just like
Full on
wild.
Freudian level.
Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah.
And then another day, when I was like, not to get too serious, but when I was drugged and raped, when I was raped, I was drugged. So I was not fully conscious, although I came in and out of it. And I think because I never really got to fight back because I was so out of it. So during the freak the fuck out phase, during one of these meditations, I started crying, and then the crying kind of turned to sobbing, and then the sobbing turned to rage. And out of nowhere, I started screaming like, get off of me, get off of me.
Right.
And kind of reliving that experience. And mind you, this is like 15 years later. I'd been in rehab. I'd had hundreds of hours of therapy at this point. But what I hadn't processed were those repressed emotions, like the stuff I never got to say. And I was like, you motherfucker. And just having this, like, it like just came out of nowhere. And there's a lot of talk about how trauma lives in the body. And even in this book that I always cite, the body keeps the score, and it's just like gets lodged in your cells. And I'm telling you, after those couple of those experiences where this like randomly out of the consciousness comes these things, I really do think a lot of that repressed emotion ends up, in your body somewhere. And I did feel lighter. Like I did leave something on that ashram. There are things that I was carrying with me that I really had no idea I was even carrying that I got to work through. But then, there's the dark side where the guru suddenly is like, oh, I see this person could like live here. And the first night I was there, he was like screaming at this woman. He was like, you are a psycho. You are insane to this woman. And it was this real dramatic conflict that they had. And this is like night 1 or 2 of me being there. And he had one night with me where he told me that I was, what did he call me? He said, you are worthless. No one will hire you. you have no respect. Is this not the case? And I was like, yeah. It was really awkward because he's doing this in front of the whole group. And some of the people were just like a couple of Brits who are coming through. It's kind of humiliating. And he also was saying it in front of my new crush, the boy. And then he's like, you cannot listen to the words of others as they call you a scumbag. You are a scumbag. No. And I couldn't stop laughing. I was like, actually, you're the first person who's ever called me a scumbag to my face, but it was so uncomfortable. And then he made me say, I'm a scumbag. Like, this is one of the things that they do to you. And I was laughing hysterically. And then I'm like, I'm a scumbag, and he's like, louder. And I'm like, I'm a scumbag. And he's like, you don't mean it. You're laughing. What is funny about being a scumbag? And I'm like, I'm a scumbag. And that was the night that he gave me my new name after I admitted I was a scumbag.
Okay, we got to know. What was your new name?
It was Prem Sarita, which is Sanskrit for river of love.
Oh, that's beautiful.
After being called a scumbag and told that I needed to renounce my scumbaggery.
You get river of love the next day with love.
Yeah, but I've given you two examples of like the, breaking you down and then like giving you something beautiful. Right. It's fucked up. Like,
yeah, it is fucked up. It also sounds like every software sales VP in history. Gaslighting 101. I think you can tell where my professional trauma lies. So you've talked a little about your experience with rehab. I suppose I wonder if your time at the ashram might have potentially been extra painful because you were dealing with essentially a full detox.
Yeah, it was a little bit like rehab, I guess, in that respect. Although I had been, when I went to Australia, I was coming on the heels of my experimental year of sobriety. And then I started drinking right before I left for Australia because I'm like, not going to Australia sober. That's insane. And I don't know that there was all that much to detox in the way that there might have been
several years
coming on the heels of another. Yeah, exactly. Earlier, like the year earlier when I got sober. But there's still that like that first 72 hours was definitely uncomfortable. But you're also detoxing like, sugar. Like there isn't, you're detoxing kind of everything and just distractions. No phones, no Wi-Fi, no television, no Twitter, no anything. There's nowhere to escape, and you're also kind of physically trapped. So
how do you get out of there? How's this thing end?
I freaking texted. I got my phone after my boy left. I got really drunk the day that my boy left. I went down to say goodbye to him.
Okay, hold on. Is this, I just assumes this is a sober facility.
It is.
Yeah, right.
I got in trouble. I went to go drop him off with a bunch of people who had to go to town, and we also dropped him off at like the train station or whatever. And then he left, and I couldn't stop crying again, hysterically, and was so emotional and upset. And then got there was like a 2-for-1 special on wine at this place, and I bought like 6 bottles of wine and drank one by myself just in the park waiting for my other friend to come who was supposed to bring us back. And so then we went back to the ashram, and there was some exercise that we were supposed to be doing, and I was just crying hysterically and acting out because I was so mad. And then he was like, "You're drunk," and I was like, clearly, obviously wasted and smelled like booze. And he was like, as punishment, he's like, do you have more? And I was like, yeah, I had like 5 bottles. And he made me share it with everyone. He was like,
as punishment, we all have a party.
Yeah. Which as an alcoholic, I was like, that's pretty cruel. I would have rather just, had to push some wheelbarrows up the hill. And I left pretty shortly thereafter, but I'd have been about 17 days, and I texted my friend, and I was like, what the fuck? Like, when are you coming to get me, the Sydney Trust Fund boy who had driven me up? Yeah. And I'm like, I want a steak and red wine. And the Patriots were in the playoffs. So I was like, I need a television. I was ready to get out of there. I was over it. I was like, this is fucking bullshit.